everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and this time you made me watch Gattaca, or I should say, Lone Wolf Jedi of Gotham made me watch Gattaca as a Patreon request. Thanks a lot to you, and I think he's also the guy who sent the movie to me in the mail quite a while back, so add this to my DVD collection, my science fiction collection. Thanks a bunch to you, man. Really appreciate it. Glad I'm finally getting around to talking about this. This is a movie that is nothing like what I thought it would be just based on the title, and I suspect that has a lot to do with why it failed at the box office. This is a science fiction film that comes out in 1997 and is all about genetic engineering and eugenics. It is kind of a like heightened, almost noirish piece, which is odd because it's set in the not too distant future, but it doesn't feel like our future so much as a universe like one removed to me. It's very stylized, and it is starring Ethan Hawke as the main character. He is a guy named Vincent who becomes a guy named Jerome, and he has to pretend to be genetically engineered in order to achieve his ultimate goal of space travel. He wants to be an astronaut. He has that old school, kind of 1960s, obsession with getting to go into space, and the world is against him and won't allow him to achieve his goals because his kind are kind of persecuted. There's a class warfare thing happening in this movie where you have the people who are genetically engineered to be better than regularly born humans at the top, and they are considered valids, and then you have the invalids, which of course is a thinly veiled, hyphenated word for invalid, not good enough, can't accomplish anything on your own. And those are simply people like you and me, who are not born perfect, and who did not have our traits chosen by our parents before birth. And so this guy's parents decided to have a child the natural way, and then when he was born, and they were immediately told in like the kind of crudest, coldest fashion in the delivery room, here's all the ailments your kid is going to probably have. Here's the percentage chance of all the things that are going to afflict him through his life, and here is basically the exact date that we think he's gonna die. And there's a voiceover at the beginning where Hawke's character says, I knew from the beginning when I was supposed to die. And they think, the society thinks that they can pinpoint people's death to almost the day. And so anyway, he has a 99% positive surety for heart disease that will kill him by the time he's 30. And he's not going to get to go into space because of that, of course. And so this is kind of a cautionary tale about the dangers of eugenics. And I think it's really easy, by the way, just jumping right into the thematic ideas of this and the social commentary here, to assume that this is a movie that is completely unequivocally 100%, it is not a good idea to do genetic engineering at all. Like, it's a completely anti-genetic engineering film in exactly the same way as Jurassic Park kind of seemed to be. I don't think Jurassic Park is making the case that someday maybe we'll be ready to bring back the dinosaurs. I think that movie is about playing God and hubris, and that there are some things that should just be left well enough alone. That at some point, nature has to win out. I don't think that movie is totally against technology or against science, but I think it does take a pretty major stand against, and the book too, Crichton's novel, against, human beings bringing back creatures from the dead, or monkeying around with biomembranes. And this movie, I don't think goes that far. This movie was pretty well received when it came out, by the way. Not a lot of detractors. 80-something% on Rotten Tomatoes, if that matters to you. And Ebert loved it, and a lot of the critics of the day said that it was refreshingly intelligent science fiction. I agree with that too, with one major caveat, which I'll get to a little bit later. There's one big thing that I take issue with this movie, but overall I think this is again, relatively intelligent science fiction film. And the thing that I most appreciate, I'm jumping around a little bit, is just that it's as character-driven as it is, and that it's about a guy, and it's about his difficulties in figuring out how to navigate this world where he is thought of as lesser. As opposed to a big, epic, blockbuster, world-building sort of movie. I like how simple and straightforward this story is. I found that really refreshing for this kind of futuristic movie, and there's a kind of a nice juxtaposition there. Like, it feels weirdly down to earth, considering how also heightened it is. I feel like I understand this society well enough through the lens of my main character. But it is kind of a character piece. I don't mean that it's like a super deep character study, but it is a textbook traditional like literary character-driven narrative. It's about a guy who has clear motivations. He wants something. We see the obstacles to his attaining that. We learn a lot about him and about the world that he lives in through his trying to get what he wants. He is made sympathetic because I want to see him attain that goal, and then by the end we see whether or not he accomplishes that, and there's nothing at all ambiguous about that. I think it's interesting to compare this to Minority Report, which I reviewed last week on request, which is an interesting movie and a thing where I did turn my sign green, but didn't appreciate it as much as I had in previous, a previous viewing years and years ago, and I won't just review that movie again, but this avoids going to all the kind of big blockbuster places that movie felt the need to do. When I thought that the premise and the initial setup of that movie would have been better served as a smaller, more thoughtful science fiction piece like this is. This does not degenerate into a conspiracy plot and kind of forget a lot of the interesting ideas that it initially sets up. Like, I think that does a little bit. It's not trying to please everybody. It seems to know that this material isn't necessarily for everyone. You could argue that it falls in a Hollywood formula a little bit, but beyond that, like, it doesn't seem afraid of losing anybody that's just not really into this premise. It's not a kitchen sink movie where like it's throwing, trying to force something for everyone. Again, with the exception of you have kind of an obligatory love interest, but I think that works okay with this particular example. It doesn't become a tear down the system film. We have the same status quo for the universe at the end of this movie as we do at the beginning. This isn't about a hero's journey where there's like an unlikely underdog hero who at the end of the film teaches everyone how to live better and kind of fixes society. And I'm not saying that can't work. I'm just saying that there are a lot of movies that kind of fall into that formula. It becomes a trap, I think, where they need to end with a big happy ending, and oddly, this actually kind of does have a happy ending, but it's not a perfect ending, and that's one of the things I really like about it. But like I said, this is a pretty literary story. This was written and directed, by the way, by the same guy who did The Truman Show, and his name is Andrew Nicole. Well, I say he wrote The Truman Show. He didn't direct that film, but he did direct this. I have not seen any of his other movies. He directed, let's take a look at this real quick. He directed movies like, well, I guess this was his first movie, in fact. And Truman Show came after this. But he directed The Terminal, which I've never seen, but I think got good reviews. Oh no, I'm sorry, he didn't direct that movie. He just came up with a story for it. Didn't even write it. Okay. But he did things like Lord of War, which I've never heard of, The Host, Anon, and he's attached to that Monopoly movie, but there's no telling if that ever finally gets made. Anyway, so I think it's kind of funny that in his two movies that he writes back to back, one of them has a character named Freeman. That is Vincent's last name, and one of them has a character named Truman. So this guy really likes on the nose kinds of names. There are some things in this movie that I think are a little bit too cute and a little too silly for it. For example, there's a term, there's like an insulting term that we use for people who are born normally, who are conceived the natural way, and it's degenerates, and that's clever, but I think it's a little too goofy for this material. And like I said, this is a heightened universe. I feel the same way to a degree with it that I did about Minority Report, where it's not a straight-up satire, but it has some satirical elements. I thought that movie had kind of some inconsistencies with that, where I couldn't decide how satirical that world was supposed to be, and it didn't seem to know if the society as it was supposed to be scary or not. And this movie, I think, has that issue to a much less degree, where like in some of the names of things, and in some of the more like stylistic aspects, I find myself going, okay, how much of a satire do you want to be? In the actual internal logic of the piece, I don't have that as much. It seems like a world where we more or less have the same the same kinds of freedoms and rights that we do in America today, but the society, so as far as the laws go, as far as the government is concerned, and the government is very much in the background in this, as are corporations. Curiously, there's not really any big statement being made, or even a lot of social commentary about business or government. It's kind of more about people and just like what we as a society have decided to do with ourselves. Like that's all very ambiguous and in the background. It's not really, you know, one of those entities over the other is a problem, or both of them are in bed together and a problem. There's not really any intrigue in this movie. There is, interestingly, a murder mystery plot that doesn't completely take over like it does in Minority Report, where that kind of becomes the story. It looks like that's going on here, and then it turns out that that's kind of there just to create a dramatic situation for a protagonist, to make it more difficult for him to be able to pass as a genetically engineered person, as a valid. So you've got a movie here that's very stylized and kind of heightened, and yet it's set in the not-too-distant future, which we're told at the very beginning of the movie. It's exactly like X-Men. You have that intertitle on the screen, the not-too-distant future. And it doesn't watch like our future to me. It watches like, I mean, of course, it has to be in the future in the sense that you have some new technologies, particularly eugenics. So, like, we've perfected the ability to basically make designer children. Your kid can be whatever gender you want it to be. You can get all of your own imperfections out of it. You can make your kid have a lot less of a likelihood of having a heart condition and cancer and you know, eye problems, etc., etc. And the heart condition thing is very important in this movie, and we'll come back later. And so but it looks like a detective movie. It looks kind of like neo-noirish. And I get the sense that this director really likes to kind of pick a vibe from another era and sort of run with it. Because The Truman Show kind of has that also, where it's, and within the context of that movie, it makes a lot of sense that, that you have this, like, heightened reality for Truman, for that character, where the rest of the world looks more like the mid-90s when the movie takes place, but where he lives is this like rose-tinted glasses version of the 1950s, and it's like this perfect squeaky clean Leave It to Beaver kind of town, and it's like he picks that aesthetic and runs with it. And again, he didn't direct that movie, but I'm sure that's in his script. I'd be surprised if it wasn't. In this, he picks the 1950s or 1930s even, going a couple decades earlier, and makes more of a noirish looking thing, so everybody's wearing like trench coats and those kinds of hats. We even have period cars, but when they drive around, they sound like they're from the future. So you've got this like kind of whirling sound, like they've got hydraulics or something, but they're not hovering, they're not flying. It's a really interesting juxtaposition, and I'm not completely sure what to make of it. I don't know if the idea is supposed to be that, like, I don't know if I'm reading too far into it when I suggest this, and I don't even know if there's any truth to this at all. But I'm thinking of things like, is the idea that if we start to play God too much and try to make ourselves in our own image, that like we go totally against nature and we say this is what we want ourselves to be, is the idea that we are going backwards then, or are we maybe trying to are we just visualizing this as looking like it's in that era because that's a period of major discrimination toward minorities, and this movie is about classism and about a group of people that thinks that they are superior to another. Maybe that's why it is. Or does it just look cool? Did he just want something to give it a bit of oomph, and instead of trying to extrapolate into the future and come up with what he really thought the future would look like, he went for more of a fantasy version of this? I don't know. It's a really interesting choice. I like it. I found myself kind of sucked into this world. What I love about movies like this is that they're extremely thought-provoking, and they're on the nose in that they're about really heady, ethical conundrums, hot-button, topical issues for the time that the movie was made anyway. And yet, they're also kind of escapist at the same time. Like, I find myself thinking about the morality of all of that before I'm thinking about the world I'm actually living in. Like, exaggerating a thing like that or going more heightened helps me to think about it in the abstract. It helps me to think of the theoretical before I'm thinking of the real-world application. So I guess I maybe take issue with Not Too Distant Future a little bit because it feels so stylized, but I don't think I mind that it is a future that looks like the past, and it is really consistent in its technologies and in doing that kind of Batman '89 thing where it feels like a hodgepodge of a lot of different eras all thrown together. Because just like that movie, it's got that kind of noirish sort of pseudo-gangster look. I say that, this isn't about organized crime or anything. I guess I should say detective before gangster. But it also has like laptops, or at least it has desktop computers that I can't tell if they're laptops or not, and it has, of course, all kinds of things with genetic engineering, including urine tests and things where you put your finger in, immediately a computer can say whether you're valid or not. So getting back to the genetic engineering thing for a minute before I get into our protagonist a little bit, I mentioned earlier that I don't think this movie is like Jurassic Park where it's 100% saying this is a bad idea, we should never do this. I think it's saying that it's complicated, and because we are already doing it to some degree, right? The difference between a premise like this and something like Jurassic Park is we've never brought back an extinct species from the dead like that, and like we've certainly not tried to bring anything back that could dominate us again and it would throw nature completely off balance. Genetic engineering is a thing that we already do to some degree. We're not straight up creating designer babies like you can in this, and we certainly weren't, you know, anything as close as we are to being able to do that now, I would imagine, you know, in 1997. This was an era where we were discussing this kind of stuff a lot. This was very much in the forefront of mainstream news, the cloning of Dolly the sheep. There was a lot of talk about whether or not cloning is okay even for medical research, and if we are, you know, ruining something about what makes us human if we play God and create another one. This is not about cloning, but that's all in the same ballpark. It's about, again, playing God, making ourselves in our own image, and how close to that can we get before we lose ourselves in some way. And what I like in this movie is that this is not that RoboCop satire thing where society has completely lost itself and we are no longer human. There are a lot of like real, thoughtful, responsible, compassionate people in this movie. I don't want to give everything away about this. I kind of play this case by case with these request reviews. Given that this movie didn't perform when it came out, and that I suspect a lot of people haven't seen it, I don't want to tell you everything because I like this. Okay, I'll go ahead and flip my sign green. I think people should take a look at this movie. And so I don't want to ruin your enjoyment and some of the surprises in this film, so I won't tell you the ending. I'll do minor spoilers. There's a couple of things that I'll have to bring up in order to discuss this at all. But this doesn't strike me as a world where we've totally lost ourselves, but we're getting maybe closer to the brink of that. And that's happening because of the class warfare, because of prejudice, and our bringing this upon ourselves, right? Creating a world where there really are physically superior people, genetically superior people to other people. Like, this watches like an allegory for racism and sexism. But what's interesting is an argument in this particular case can actually be made for genetic superiority because we are intentionally creating people that are genetically better than other people, that have a better chance at survival, that have a better chance at whatever careers, especially in, you know, majorly intellectual fields or, you know, heavily athletic fields, people are wanting to go in. And this movie kind of becomes all about a different kind of destiny from a lot of other sci-fi and fantasy movies. It's not about the capital D destiny. It's not about capital F fate. It's not about a celestial power that, or like just the universe at large, however you want to look at it, God or whatever, that says you are supposed to do this. This is what I've commanded. You were born for this particular purpose. In this, it's literal playing God in the sense that we have created the purpose for each person that is born. Genetic destiny. And so it's not natural because the universe didn't deem, you know, each person when they're born, this is what you're supposed to do with your life. Their parents did, and the science did. And so there's a character in this movie played by Jude Law who I think is really interesting, and I think it's a fantastic performance from him. He's always good. This is one of the better performances I've seen from him, and I don't know if I want to go Oscar worthy, but I mean, it's close. It's really good. And he is a genetically engineered character who was an Olympic swimmer, and he got a silver medal. And he was born, he thinks, to be the best, and he wasn't. And so he attempts to commit suicide because he feels like he's a failure and he has no worth and there's no reason for living. One of the things I like about in this movie is that it doesn't vilify either side. It makes human characters out of valids and invalids. He doesn't really treat Ethan Hawke's character as lesser, so much as just initially kind of an irritant, and then very quickly they start to develop a mutual respect for each other. Like their relationship is really interesting. They have kind of an immediate animosity and an immediate camaraderie all at the same time that I found myself really buying, and it was a neat balancing act. They've got some fantastic banter throughout this movie. And I also want to mention that dialogue in general is very old Hollywood in this film, which fits that kind of noir aesthetic, and I like that a lot too. Jerome is, you know, a genetically superior man, like most of the people in this world, but some people are born the natural way. And it's interesting, they're not talked about that way. Everybody else, the Valids, think of natural birth now as unnatural, because they think that it's more right to give people every possible opportunity and to fulfill their full potential. The notion of potential is a big thing in this movie. The idea that you can't ever go past your full potential. And if you seem to, it means that we didn't define that potential that way in the first place. And so this whole movie is about that genetic fate idea of you know, do you have to be what your genes tell you are, and is it possible to become more than the sum of your parts? You know, human beings are fallible, and at the point that they decide they're not, they miss all of the things that make human beings unique and that make us worthwhile. And you end up with these huge oversights where you assume that you understand everything about people, and then you miss the boat on like you know, what flaws in regular, naturally born human beings can actually be assets, but also you don't realize that that people do have that capacity to, you know, mind over matter, to make themselves better through, you know, pure sheer will. That's a lot of what this movie is about. And so both of these characters are in tragic situations. Jerome doesn't have a perfect life just because he was born with every possibility to succeed in a way that Ethan Hawke's character wasn't, because he's got all this pressure on him. Like, if you don't succeed, what does that say about you? You had every opportunity, and you were almost like genetically programmed to succeed. So so to him, he's almost worth less than an invalid if he doesn't manage to accomplish what he was supposed to. And so he wants to die. And he gives Vincent the opportunity to pretend to be him in order to fulfill his dream of going into space and making a space flight to Titan. I mentioned earlier that I think the name has a lot to do with why this movie didn't succeed. Like, Gattaca doesn't scream somewhat understated, character-driven, like thoughtful, kind of heady science fiction film. This sounds like a giant space epic, and that's what I assumed it was, just based on that. Gattaca sounds like Galaga, and I imagine a lot of people were confused if they did see advertising, because I don't know how well this movie was advertised. Like I said, I don't remember trailers for it. And I think a lot of other people would have needed to see what the big epic space opera looked like before they went and saw a thing called Gattaca, which sounds maybe a little bit generic. Apparently, it's a clever title if you know what it means, and I didn't, because I don't know anything, you know, I'm not a geneticist, I'm not a scientist, and you know, I don't know anything about eugenics, and so I would not have known that it was based on the letters that are at the beginning of the 4 nucleobases of DNA, which are guanine, adenine, thymine, and cytosine. Like, I wouldn't know that. It's kind of a clever title, but it just screams space epic, and that's not what this is. But I like that there's a space component to it, I guess just because I was kind of expecting space. I also think that it's interesting that in a world where we are starting to genetically engineer everybody and we're obsessed with self-improvement, we are regularly sending rockets up and exploring space. And in some ways, this world seems better to me than our world. You've got kids that want to go into space again, that want to be astronauts, that are curious about the universe that they live in. And, like, it can't be all bad if we have found our intellectual, curiosity again. And so this is supposed to be in a subgenre of science fiction called biopunk, which I had never heard of before. It's like cyberpunk, except it's with biology instead of mechanical systems. And it's supposed to be about, kind of cautionary tales, dystopias, because of taking, biology too far, biological science too far. But this doesn't watch like a dystopia to me. This watches like a world with a lot of problems, just like the world that we live in now has problems. I mean, some of them seem kind of insurmountable, certainly. It is definitely a problem, more than a problem, when you have this class warfare thing and there is a section that actually kind of has an argument for their superiority. And I'm not saying that the regular humans are so inferior that they should be treated differently, but there's actually an argument when, with these kinds of class warfare situations, there usually isn't. Usually it's bigotry based on something completely superficial. And what they're missing, of course, and this is kind of the point of the movie, is that the regular humans have all of this potential that they're not seeing because they didn't program them, and it's unpredictable. And so they're making assumptions about what will happen to them that aren't necessarily true because they have the ability to move beyond their, some of their flaws. I like that this movie doesn't pretend like, everyone has the capacity to do anything. It doesn't say that human beings aren't limited, but it does suggest that A, determination and willpower really counts for something, and B, if you believe that that you can accomplish anything because you were born that way and you don't really have any limitation, you're actually not going to try. You're not going to dream as much. And that's the problem that Jerome has in the film, where he just does what he's expected to do, and when he can't fulfill his purpose, he doesn't know what he's about. And you have a kid who is creative because of his limitations. And I can speak from experience, and lots of people can, that you tend to be more creative and you tend to get more passionate about things when there are hurdles to jump over. So all of the invalids have to get menial labor jobs, and Vincent is working as a janitor for Gattaca, which is, even though the title of that is about biology, that place is actually about space travel, which is hilarious because it sort of proves my point for me, that sounds like a space thing, and so they made it in the film a space thing. And he is, as close as he thinks he can possibly get to what he really wants to do in life. And he's, never going to be allowed to do that because he is at a, or at least this is what the film is supposed to be suggesting, that he is at the, bottom social ladder, and he's never going to be trusted with anything of that importance and with that kind of responsibility. And I should mention, by the way, because I said earlier that the government is very much in the background in this, and another way in which this doesn't feel like a full-blown dystopia to me is that, at least on paper, we have pretty much the same rights that we do now, but society has created these this social class divide, and it's kind of sad that people are being called invalid, and in a world where you have a law in the books that says that you're not allowed to discriminate against invalids for work. And he gets really lucky, and he meets up with Jerome, who has tried to commit suicide and has lost feeling in his legs, and he can't swim anymore, and he wouldn't be able to do anything like go into space. And so he's basically going to allow Vincent to become him. And at first, I wondered if this really made any sense. I missed that Vincent was not already becoming part of the space program, and so I spent a lot of the movie going, I don't understand how everybody at this place believes this is the same guy, because he goes through all this work to disguise himself and to be as genetically this other guy as humanly possible. But the guy's got a British accent, and I was like, how is it that nobody, recognizes that he sounds totally different? And I didn't realize it's because he wasn't actually there yet. I don't know if the movie makes it clear enough that that's what's going on, but on my first viewing, I was confused about that for quite a while until I finally picked up on it later on. But anyway, so as this happens, as he starts training at the facility, and I'm not sure I buy that a guy that has a 99% positive chance at heart disease, and has, all of these other ailments and potential for ailments, that he really would be able to keep up as well as he's keeping up. The movie kind of it plays with that a little bit. There's a couple of token moments where he's like massively out of breath and trying to hide it and stuff like that. But like he's trying to be an astronaut, which is like really difficult. And I get the mind over matter thing, but that's a place where I think it goes just a little bit too far. Anyway, so he's there as there's a murder investigation all of a sudden, and he ends up becoming the prime suspect. Not Jerome, but Vincent. He accidentally leaves an eyelash somewhere, and there's a guy that gets killed, and it's not important who killed whom for why. You can watch the movie and find that out for yourself. But of course, our protagonist didn't do it, and he's being looked for through a lot of the movie while he's hiding in plain sight. And like I said, that's kind of there just to make it more difficult for him to fit in, but also, I think, to, shed light on the prejudice. And you have a detective, a very 30s noirish detective, kind of a stereotype, but a fun stereotype, played by Alan Arkin, who's one of my favorite actors and one of my favorite character actors, and he played Captain Invincible in my favorite B movie of all time, The Return of Captain Invincible, in the early 80s. And he's also in The Rocketeer. And he won an Oscar in the early 2010s, I think. I forget what for. But he's a fantastic actor. He was not the leading man I think he should have been, but it was a lot of fun to see him here. And it's cool because it's an all-star cast, but there's also a couple of character actors like that I don't see a lot that were fun to see here. Elias Koteas, believe it or not, is also in this movie, who's Casey Jones in the original Ninja Turtles movie, and he is Ethan Hawke's dad. He's Vincent's father in the flashbacks in this. And he's really good in the couple scenes that he's in. But anyway, so this leads me, and this will be my last point on this, to my big criticism of this movie, which is, I get the idea that it's a problem that these regular people are being treated like complete second-class citizens, and like they have like deformities or something in this world, or like they're massively disabled. And I don't know how many generations we've had the genetic engineering technology in this, but everything is relative. I can sympathize with that idea to a degree, where if you live in a world where, let's say, 80% of people I don't know what the percentage is in this, but it's quite a bit. So let's say it's like 80% of people don't have hardly any diseases ever. There are things that fall through the cracks. The love interest in this has the same heart condition potential and problem that our main character does. That's kind of the one thing that connects them and makes her like only a pseudo-valid. I thought that was interesting, and I thought that was a cool starting place for them, but that relationship did seem kind of obligatory, and I wish that they had a little bit more screen time together. I kind of bought it. I mean, I like that it doesn't go exactly where I expect it to, but it does kind of give you that kind of we gotta have a makeout beat, you know, in the movie. I guess I'm praising it for being old Hollywood and kind of criticizing it for that at the same time. But I don't know. I guess I'm somewhat conflicted about that. They nearly completely win me over on that, but they just don't quite have enough screen time together. The problem is not letting every person, because of physical limitations, do any kind of job is not necessarily discrimination. This guy has a 99% surety of heart failure, and he wants to be an astronaut. We wouldn't let that guy be an astronaut now, regardless of genetic engineering. It's because he'd be it would be a massive health risk. Like, for that guy, he's probably going to die if we send him in space. And the movie plays it like he's just being discriminated against because he's different. And he shouldn't have to only take menial labor jobs. He is pretty much like me and you and anybody. Like, I couldn't be an astronaut. I have massive, like, eyesight problems. But I'm not going around saying, like, oh, I'm being, you know, discriminated against. People are like ableist or whatever against me because you know, I have like a lazy eye and partial double vision and I can't see in 3D, and how dare you not let me go into space. Like, I think the movie overplays its hand a little bit at the beginning, or just like way overdoes his genetic faults. Like, what would make a great deal more sense to me would be if, because I say he's like anybody else, it's a little too extreme in his physical ailments and his problems. Like, what if it was just that he had like a normal likelihood, you know, statistic probability of getting heart disease? What if it was like 5% or like 3%? But all these genetically engineered people, it's like 1% or 0.5%. And they go, well, he's too much of a risk. We can't let him do anything but be a janitor. I think that's what it probably should have been. And I don't want to rewrite this story, but I don't think it really fits with the premise that they've established. If the idea is supposed to be that people are nigh perfect unless they're, because you can choose all of the traits of a person, unless they're born naturally, and we treat people that are born naturally like they were born in a wheelchair or something, and we just don't let them do anything, that's what it feels like it's supposed to be. But this guy has, like, extreme potential issues. Like, he would never be allowed to be an astronaut, and so, like, it's not fair if that guy's not allowed to be an entrepreneur or start his own company. If it's, yeah, you're probably going to have a heart attack on your way up to Titan. It's going to hurt you and possibly kill everyone else on board. Yeah, that guy shouldn't be an astronaut. So I like the premise of this a lot, and I like a lot of the execution. But I have to nearly ignore that part of it, where like that's just too extreme, and it's a big part of the movie, certainly, but it's just one big detail that very easily could have been tweaked, and I wouldn't really have a lot of issues with the film at all. But yeah, that's a problem. Anyway, so like I said, I am feeling it. I think this is a really solid movie, and it's got great setup and payoff. Like I said, it's wonderfully character-driven. It's kind of a little bit of a tearjerker at the end, and I like the heightened components to it. Odd choice, but at the end of the day, I think I like the stylistic nature of it. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed my rambling about Gattaca, and if you would like me to take a look at a movie or a comic book, you can jump on the $15 tier on Patreon. That's patreon.com/geekvolution, and that allows you to put in a request that I will get you on the rotation. And if you want to just put in for one, I will put you on the list and just knock yours out. Or if you want to stay at that $15 tier, you'll be in a regular rotation, and I will get to you every 2 to 3 months or so. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody, and I will see you again next time.